If you like solitude, if you want to be the protagonist of this Camino, together with the grandeur of the landscape and facing the harshness of the cold and the sun, if you want the sunsets to draw you into their deep silences, and for the mornings, the breaks of dawn to stir your soul, this is your Camino. Over 13 days I walked the Camino Sanabrés, from the quiet fields of western Spain to the cathedral steps of Santiago. It was a pilgrimage of contrasts, sunlit plains and shadowed forests, long stretches of solitude, and evenings around communal tables, unexpected delays and moments of serene clarity. I began this journey in uncertainty, travel disruptions, lost connections, and a long path ahead. But with each sunrise, each kilometre, I felt myself reconnect to the land, to others walking the way, and to the deeper part of myself. This is not just a story of terrain or distance, but of resilience, discovery, and unlikely grace in detours. Over this video, I invite you to walk with me through the highs, the low moments, and the simple beauty that unfolded, step by step, day by day, towards Santiago. The Camino doesn't always begin where you expect. Mine started in disruption. Flight delays, missed trains, connections unravelling one after another. By the time I finally reached Madrid, I'd already been walking a different kind of pilgrimage, one of patience and endurance. The only bus I could catch left at 6:45 p.m, reaching Zamora too late to continue. With no albergue open at that hour, I stayed in a hotel. Yet, there was a silver lining. An unexpected afternoon in Madrid. I wandered the shaded paths of Parque del Retiro, drank in the sound of the fountains, and paused in cafes, letting the weight of travel slowly lift. By the time I finally lay my head down, I'd been on the road for over 30 hours, exhausted but ready. The morning came quickly. At 8:30 I was at the bus stop, only to find the next bus to Granja wasn't until late afternoon. I had no choice but to take a taxi. 20 minutes later, and €60 lighter, I was finally stood at the starting point of the Camino Sanabrés. And then, at last, I walked. With each step, with each crunch of footfall, I felt my body relax. The stress of the airports and timetables fell away. I was back on the Camino, and peace returned to the simple act of walking. The sky was overcast, the air cool, perfect weather. Before long I was surrounded by the Castilian countryside, opera dirt tracks, wide golden plains, and the quiet rustle of grasses in the breeze. Solitude embraced me. I started late, so the path was almost empty. Hours passed with nothing but the sound of bird song and the rhythm of my boots on the earth. With each step I realised how much I'd missed this. The simplicity of moving forward, the space to think and breathe, the way the Camino strips away the noise of the world until only the essentials remain. I felt at home again. Near the horizon, a lone pilgrim walked ahead. Eventually I caught up. His name was Lizardo. To my surprise he spoke good English, and we soon fell into easy conversation. He had been walking since April, having started on the Levante Camino in Valencia. Months of journeying had shaped him. His stories carried the weight of long days, countless encounters, and the quiet strength that comes from perseverance. As he spoke, I felt humble. My own Camino was just beginning, but his had already spanned seasons. For a short while we walked side by side, two strangers bound by the same road, until our steps naturally parted again. The path stretched out into long, straight tracks of red earth that seemed to touch the horizon. The sight pulled me back to a memory from the Frances, that endless walk after Calle de los Condes, where the road ran forward with no shade, no villages, only sky and soil and silence. Here in the Sanabrés, the feeling returned though gentler, a reminder that the Camino repeats itself in patterns, each route echoing another, always with something new to teach. Later that day, I arrived in Tábara. The albergue welcomed pilgrims with warmth and the comfort of community. Over a simple meal, stories were shared, laughter echoed, and friendships began to take root. The day began in frustration, yet it ended in fellowship, with the Camino once again reminding me why I returned. And so the Camino Sanabrés began. Not as planned, but perhaps all the more meaningful for it. From delays and detours, to sunlit plains and shared meals, the first day was a reminder that the Camino never unfolds the way you expect, and that is where its beauty lies. After a good night's sleep in Tábara, I woke early, slipped on my pack and stepped into the cool morning. The moon still lingered in the fading night sky as the first light of dawn spread across the plains. A chill caught my hands, and for a while I resisted putting on gloves, wanting to feel the raw bite of the morning air. With every step the Camino felt more alive. The landscape stretched out wide and golden, almost Serengeti-like in its vastness. I paused often just to stand in the silence, listening to the soft breeze and the faint bird song that carried across the fields. The stillness had a beauty of its own, and with each pause I felt my body relax further into the rhythm of pilgrimage. A group of cyclists on the Via de la Plata whirled past, calling out a cheerful Buen Camino. A little further on I found them stopped with a broken chain, and we shared a few words. Proof again the Camino is made of simple fleeting connections. In Villanueva de las Pelas, a bar offered a welcome stop. I ordered a tortilla with a cas limon, the perfect pilgrim's treat, while the others came to refuel. Soon Tanya and Lizardo joined me, and we shared the moment together, the kind of gathering that makes the way feel like home. From there the path climbed past old wine cellars cut into the hillside, before opening onto a mesa of red earth and endless sky. It was a view that demanded stillness, Spain at its most raw and expansive. The descent carried me into Santa Coya, where Lizardo and I paused briefly for a drink. Then I pressed on. A final kilometre over the river brought me into Santa Marta, where the Donativo albergue stands beside the monastery. Humble, quiet, welcoming. Dinner was nothing more than a microwave paella, but it was enough. Day 2 became one of my favourite stages, a gift of landscapes and silence, broken only by bird song and the rhythm of my own footsteps. On this day, more than any other, the Camino reminded me that the stillness is also a kind of beauty. I set out in the half-light of dawn. The air had a bite to it, sharp enough that I pulled on my jumper before leaving Santa Marta. For the first stretch I walked with Tanya. The two of us shared the stillness of morning, our conversation flowing as easily as the path ahead. She told me stories of living off-grid in Australia, our life stripped back to essentials, a rhythm dictated by sun, rain and soil. I listened closely. There was something in her words that resonated with the Camino itself. Life simplified to walking, eating, sleeping and noticing the world around you. The beauty of her stories clashed with the landscape around us. This opening section was not the Camino at its finest. Quarries lined the route, with heavy trucks thundering past and kicking up clouds of dust. The ground shook with their weight and air tasted of grit. I pressed on ahead, eager to leave it behind, searching for silence again. Soon the Camino turned, the industrial scars fading as the track led into forest. Pine needles cushioned my steps, bird songs filtered through the branches, and the air grew clearer. It was like crossing an unseen threshold, from a world of noise and machines into a space where I could breathe deeply again. After 11 kilometres I reached Calzadilla de Terra. My body longed for something simple to break the morning's fast, but the village was shuttered, silent and the cafe closed. A common lesson on the Camino: you cannot always rely on what you expect. I waited a while, then Tanya caught up, and we studied our phones. The next chance was Ourense de Terra, another 2 kilometres. We walked beside an irrigation canal, its water glinting in the sun, then wound through narrow village streets. By the time we reached Ourense, we had covered 13 kilometres without a proper stop, only to discover the bar closed on Tuesdays. Sometimes the Camino provides, and sometimes it tests your patience. The path left the village and wound through scrubland. It climbed gradually onto a mesa. The landscape felt raw, untamed, demanding more from me than the soft plains of earlier days. The route dipped again toward a dam. The sheer scale of it dwarfed me, a reminder of how small a pilgrim truly is against the works of man and nature alike. My left calf had begun to tighten, a dull pain that flared with each step. On the Camino you learn quickly. Pain is part of the pilgrimage. You acknowledge it, adjust your pace, and keep moving forward. At last, after hours under the sun, I entered Rionegro del Puente. The albergue stood waiting, a place to finally lay down my pack. Inside I found the familiar rhythm of pilgrim life, showers, laundry strung to dry, the weary walkers settling in for the evening. Later, I joined Tanya, George and Marcus for a meal in town. After a day marked by dust, closed cafes and stubborn pain, it felt good to share food and laughter. Conversation flowed easily. stories, reflections, small moments of humour that only pilgrims truly understand. Day 3 reminded me that not every stage shines with postcard views. Some days test patience and endurance, but the Camino has a way of rewarding you in other ways, in companionship, in shared meals, and in the quiet gratitude of simply arriving. I left early, knowing this would be the longest day of the Camino so far. 42 kilometres stood ahead of me, and I would need every ounce of strength to see it through. But this day was heavy for more than just the distance. In Rionegro, I had to say goodbye to my Camino friends, Tanya, George, Marcus and Benita. We had walked and shared meals together, found rhythm in the first days. Now our paths split. I shouldered my pack, waved them farewell, and stepped into the morning air, with the quiet knowledge that I'd walk alone. Out on the track, the road stretched across open grasslands, the wind tugging at me. Clouds massed on the horizon, dark and brooding. In Ambía, a rainbow arched over the town, a fleeting gift of colour before the storm. I paused to take it in, then carried on, stocking up on fruit and juice and a cask of lemon to give me a small lift. The path led into forest roads, heavy with damp, the air pressing in. The silence here was broken only by the wind in the branches and the crunch of my footsteps. Kilometres ticked by, steady but slow. Midway through, I stopped at San Salvador de Palazuelo to eat lunch outside the church. No cafes open, no chatter of pilgrims, only the stillness of stone walls and the call of distant birds. I chewed slowly, listening to that silence. I didn't know it at the time, but this was not just a solitary day. It was the beginning of a solitary week. 7 days would pass before I would see another pilgrim on the road. After lunch, the climb began, the steepest of the day. It was then that the skies finally broke. Rain drummed on the forest canopy as I pulled my coat and tightened the straps of my backpack. Each step uphill felt heavier, but I pressed forward, water trickling down my hood, the forest glistening in the downpour. As the storm eased, the world turned misty and grey. Deer darted across the path, quiet reminders that even in solitude, I was not entirely alone. The kilometres stretched, 30 passed, then 35. My body ached, my legs dragged, but the castle Puebla de Sanabria finally rose in the distance, a silhouette on the hill guiding me home for the night. Crossing the bridge into the old town, I felt the weight of the day lift. 42 kilometres, the longest stage of my Camino Sanabrés. It had cost me dearly in energy, and it marked the start of something new. Walking without the company of fellow pilgrims. The days ahead would test me with silence and solitude. But as I dropped my pack and lay back in my room, I knew this too was part of the Camino, a chapter written not in conversation, but in the quiet dialogue between myself, the land, and the path ahead. I set out well before dawn, the street still heavy with darkness. At 7 a.m. I was already deep in the route, guided only by the arrows and my head torch. The early light was faint, and the shadows stretched long across the path. I had hoped to catch a glimpse of the Iberian wolf in the woodlands at dawn. They are crepuscular, active at dawn and dusk, but though I walked quietly, eyes alert, I saw none. Soon the path angled upward through a small woodland to Terroso. At about 10 kilometres I paused outside the village church and munched on chocolate digestives, letting my lungs catch up, letting the silence settle. Back into forest trails I walked to Camino de Sanabria. I stopped in a cafe and treated myself to a Cas Limon, a small luxury on a long day, before carrying on. As I left, I passed a sculpture inscribed with the words annotated at the start of this video. You like the solitude, you want to be the protagonist of this Camino. That line struck me. I hadn't seen a fellow pilgrim since Rionegro. The forest path then led me toward the base of two giant flyovers, built for the high-speed train. Here the arrows went rogue, one painted on a crash barrier, the other made out of fence posts. I trusted my senses less and pulled out my map, and realised I'd missed a turn-off between the flyovers. I backtracked and found a sign forbidding passage. A small wooden bridge had collapsed. Beyond it stood a waist-high concrete wall. I paused, then I crossed. Placing hands on the ledge, edging forward. With a spontaneous leap I landed on the other side, rolled and stood again. It was a little unceremonious, but there are advantages to being the only pilgrim around. The path wound past a ruined building, then across a small suspension bridge that bounced beneath my step. 2 people at a time, the warning sign read. I crossed alone. The trail then zigzagged upward, steeper than anything yet on the Sanabria. Markers were replaced by yellow tip posts. About halfway up, I startled a cow mid-path. It bolted uphill, pausing to glance back. Emerging from the tree line, I dropped onto the road and walked into Padanello. I stopped at the bar for a tortilla patata and a cold drink, the Camino offering a moment of rest. Rain had begun to fall, the temperature dropped, and I slipped my coat back on. After the break, I rejoined forest and road paths in tandem. In Asiberos, the arrows vanished again. Luckily, I passed an old man loading his car. He shouted, "Ruta de Pellegrino," and pointed me onward. The final kilometres wound through wooded slopes and patches of sunlight. Ruins lined the approach into Lubián. On one door lintel, the date, 1709, stood etched. Time, decay, memory, all wrapped into one silent entrance. The only one in the albergue. I had not passed a single pilgrim the whole day. The hospitalia would arrive between 7 and 7:30. The building was tired, but it had a shower and a bed. After chores, I walked to the local bar. A few drinks later, I checked into the albergue, then went for the pilgrim's menu. The day had been longer and harsher than I anticipated, full of missteps and reboots, yet arriving alone, in silence felt profound. This was my last full day in Castilla. Tomorrow I cross into Galicia, but tonight I rest in solitude, among walls that have seen hundreds of pilgrims before me. The albergue in Lubián had been eerie the night before. Dangling lights, creaking fittings, owls calling outside. At first light I was glad to be back on the road, escaping into motion. A downhill start soon gave way to a steep climb through woods. At the summit I crossed into Galicia. It should have felt like coming home. The morning light touched the valleys below, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe. I paused to soak in the landscape and tranquility. But the Camino had other plans. In Acanda, the green fell away and the world turned black. Hillsides stripped bare, trees reduced to skeletons, fields turned to ash. I had walked straight into the aftermath of August wildfires. For the next 15 kilometres, devastation stretched to the horizon. Villages clung to survival, spared only by stone walls where the flames had stopped. The gravel path glowed faintly against the ruin, a single line of yellow through a sea of abyss. This was my lowest day. The destruction was not just around me, it pressed into me. Each step grew heavier, the silence thick with loss. I couldn't help but think of the lives lost, the homes and livelihoods destroyed, the nature erased in a matter of hours. The Camino is meant to bring peace, but here it carried grief. I had seen wildfires on the news, but nothing prepares you for the smell of ash, the stillness of the land stripped bare, the weight of walking through absence itself. And yet, even here the Camino whispered. Small green islands dotted the ruin, a lone tree still standing, and from the black soil the merendera, a purple flower opening defiantly in the ash, fragile and yet unbroken, a sign. The Camino is a mirror of life. There are seasons when fire takes everything, when the familiar is reduced to ruin, when colour itself seems to vanish. In those seasons, despair waits to claim you. If you stop, it will. But the path teaches you otherwise. Keep moving. Forward is the only way through. Step by step, renewal begins. And even in the blackest landscapes, the first signs of life return. By afternoon, the sun bore down, merciless and hot, as if the day wanted to leave me no doubt about this lesson. And at last, I reached A Gudiña. The albergue was modern, spotless, bright lights, clean walls, even washing machines, a stark contrast to the ruin I had crossed. Day 6 was the hardest day of the Sanabria, but it was also the most profound, because out of the fire-scorched hills and silence, I learnt the truth I will carry with me always. Forward is the only way through. I left earlier than usual, so I would pass the worst of the wildfire destruction under the cover of darkness, leaving its charred scars behind before the daylight scrutiny. The head torch led me through silent streets, only the faint rustle of nocturnal life accompanied me. As daylight broke, the Camino finally brought me into the Galician hills. The smoky remains of the fire faded behind me. Before me now stretched lofty mountain ridges, rolling green hills and open sky. I walked high above the valley, the air thinning, the views growing ever more expansive. Much of the day was on road. I reckon 90% of the kilometres passed beneath my boots on tarmac. My feet felt each one, yet the sacrifice was worth it for what I saw. Mountain crests fading into the mist, vast panoramas framed by the reservoir below, and distant ridges pushing upward. Every corner turned offered another sweeping vista, another moment to pause and breathe. In Bolano, I stopped at a picnic bench overlooking the rolling hills. I'd covered 13 kilometres and felt hunger tug at me. The silence was cavernous, broken only by bird song and the whisper of wind across the grass. I took my time with my snacks, letting the beauty press in. The road then dipped gradually towards Campo Beceros, where I hoped for food. A cold drink was on offer, little comfort, but a drink nonetheless. From there, a short climb through Porto Camba returned me to forest gravel tracks. The trail hugged the mountainside, exposing the valley in sweeping panoramas, the hills rolling away to blue haze. For the final 6 kilometres into Laza, the path reverted to road. I had to check in at the ambulance station for the albergue and collect the keys. Once inside, I realised I would be the only peregrino again, now 4 days with no fellow pilgrims. It felt like I was getting Airbnbs for €10. Later that evening, I found a small back alley taberna and ordered a caña. Another patron struck up a conversation, his Spanish flowing faster than I could follow. He told me of his life, from Switzerland to here, music, family and dreams. That small exchange felt like connection in a silent stretch of trail. I asked him where I might find food. He pointed me to a local restaurant not on any map, tucked away in a quiet lane. I thanked him with a drink, then made my way there. The meal was simple but filling, the kind of sustenance that felt earned after a long day. Partway through, a group of locals burst through the door, villagers moving from bar to bar, singing together. Their voices filled the small room with laughter and song. Diners clapped in rhythm, glasses were raised in time to the music. It was spontaneous, heartfelt and alive, a glimpse of Galicia's soul. I sat back and smiled, grateful to witness it. The day had been long on roads, heavy underfoot, framed by mountains and silence. Yet each vista, each quiet hill reminded me why I walk, for these moments above the world when everything slows to the steps in front of you. At 7 a.m, I dropped the albergue keys back at the ambulance station and stepped onto the Camino once more. The first hour and a half was steady, flat, mostly on roads. The cool of the morning was a gift, for I knew the sun would soon rise strong. Beyond Tamicelas, the path tilted upward. I had timed it well, climbing before the sun crested the mountains. By the time it did, I was nearly at the top, and suddenly I was above the clouds. It was one of the most beautiful sights of the Sanabria so far, my second favourite day for views. The morning light played gently across the peaks, painting them gold while the valley still lay in mist. It felt as though I was walking on the roof of the world. Peace surrounded me, no voices, no footsteps but my own, just the stillness of the mountains and the hush of the cloud drifting below. The Camino carried me into Alberguera, where I found an open bar. No hearty food, but there were cakes and fruits. and everywhere the walls and ceilings were covered with scallop shells, signed by pilgrims stretching back decades. The oldest I spotted dated from 2004. It was a reminder that though I had not seen many fellow pilgrims lately, I walked in their footsteps. A gentle rise followed, taking me to the day's highest point before the road plunged deeply down. The valley opened like a great amphitheatre. My knees complained as the descent grew sharper, each step jarring. At Villa de Ballo, the square was packed, and every bar table taken, locals and travellers alike filling the streets. I pressed on. In nearby Burrieda, I finally found space to rest. A cold drink and a slice of empanada, a small luxury and much needed. Then the Camino revealed its next test, a long, unbroken gravel road, straight as an arrow, stretching 4 kilometres ahead. The sun was merciless now, high above with no shade to soften it. I baked on that road, the heat radiating from the stone and dust. Every step seemed to echo the same rhythm, forward, forward, forward. These are the stretches that test patience as much as stamina. No scenery to distract, no curves to surprise, just endurance under a punishing sky. At last the gravel gave way to forest tracks, shaded at last by the trees. Cool air returned and the silence of the woods wrapped around me. After 54 kilometres I reached Xunquiera, the albergue welcomed me with quiet stone walls and the promise of rest. Not long after, a cyclist arrived, the first pilgrim I had seen since Rionegro. He introduced himself, a captain in the Spanish Navy, cycling all the way from Cadiz. In 2 days he would be in Santiago. We shared a meal together. It was simple, filling, the kind that renews tired bodies and reminds you that you're not alone on the road. That evening I reflected on the journey so far. This day had given me some of the most peaceful views of the Camino. Walking above the clouds, the sunlight playful across the mountains. But it also marked a turning point. Beyond here, the Sanabria would change. More roads, more cities, more industry. The wild beauty of the mountains would give way to the press of the modern world. Perhaps that is why this day felt so precious. It was a reminder of the Camino's gift, moments of stillness and splendour, when you're lifted above the noise of life, and all that remains is the path, the sky, and the peace of simply walking. I left just before 8 AM, saying farewell to Captain Pilgrim in the mist. The early light was gentle, but it did nothing to soften what awaited. The smooth gravel quickly gave way to hard tarmac, and it stayed that way. From here on, the road pounded my feet. The scenery offered little. Lines of trees, small farms, industrial edges creeping in. But then the route led into an industrial estate, lorries roaring past, crossings made dangerous, noise everywhere. My heart jolted. I almost forgot how quiet the Camino had been. The stretch into Ourense's outskirts dragged on. The city lay in the valley, bustling and loud. I entered the centre, surrounded by crowds, traffic, signage, shops, and an assault on senses grown used to silence. I found the albergue, first in, waiting for the doors to open. I ordered a cold drink at a bar nearby and rested, hoping for pilgrims to arrive, but none did. This was my worst day, all on road, scenery tarnished by industry, and the shock of re-entering urban life after so much solitude. I felt exposed, uneasy, longing for the peace of nothing but walking and sky. I left early, glad to be back in the countryside after the chaos of Ourense. The morning was overcast, a grey sky softening the world, but it felt like a relief. Cooler air, gentler light. After the harsh noise of the city, this quiet return to the road felt like coming home. The first steps were on tarmac. My feet winced at the hard road after days of softer trails. The welcome of country life returned slowly. Fields, hedgerows, small chapels, distant hills. Getting out of the city was its own challenge, finding the arrows, dodging traffic. I leaned heavily on Ourense maps and intuition. After 2 kilometres I finally broke free of the bustle, and the Camino opened up before me. The route alternated between quiet lanes and low traffic roads. I passed hedgerows spilling with wildflowers, stone walls glinting in muted light, and little farms that seemed untouched by hurry. The wind rustled through corn, and the sky stretched wide above me. I paused often, not out of fatigue but for peace. In those pauses I remembered how quiet walking felt. No horns, no engines, just the world breathing. As I approached Saya, the landscape flattened, rolling fields of grain, distant villages tucked into folds of land. The road narrowed, lined by ancient walls and overhanging trees. Entering the village, the vibe changed again. More houses, more signs, the scent of bakeries and cooking. I followed the stone streets to the albergue. For the first time in 7 days, I was no longer alone. The albergue was almost full. Many new pilgrims had begun in Ourense, the final 100 kilometres. After a week of solitary walking, the sudden swell of voices, backpacks, and laughter felt both strange and comforting. This day was a reminder. Even after the hardest of days, the Camino gives you back its quiet, and then, just when you're used to solitude, it returns the company of others. I didn't sleep well, restless, tossing and turning, until finally I gave up at 5:40. By 6 a.m. I was out the door, the air cool and heavy with morning mist. The road ahead looked promising, just 16 kilometres, an easy stage, a reward after the longer days. I've been looking forward to that chance to recover. But the Camino had other plans. The influx of new pilgrims starting from Ourense had filled every bed at the stage end. Nothing left. nothing available. My short day was gone. Instead of 16 kilometres, I faced 34, double the distance. I remembered the disappointment weighing heavier than my backpack. I had wanted rest, but what I got was another marathon. The first 10 kilometres were nothing but tarmac, climbing steadily out of Saya. My footsteps echoed on the hard road, the early light still dim, the air cool against my skin. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, I was already near the halfway point of the day. The climb wasn't punishing, but the thought of the distance ahead made it feel harder. At 9 in the morning, I reached Ocastro, the village where I had planned to stop. I sat down for breakfast, but it was bittersweet. The food tasted flat, and I couldn't shake the thought. This should have been the end of my day. I had imagined finishing early, washing clothes, resting in the shade, maybe even a nap. Instead, I still had 25 kilometres to go. From Ocastro, the route softened, weaving into woodland paths. Birds sang from the branches. The air smelt of damp leaves and earth. The shade was welcome, and for a while my mood lifted. The Camino was reminding me that even when it pushes harder than you want, it still carries beauty. The road alternated between gravel tracks and country lanes. Small hamlets appeared, stone houses with flowers on the windowsills, dogs barking lazily from behind gates. At 21 kilometres, I stopped in a tiny village and sat at a picnic table to rest. I ate, drank, and watched the clouds drift overhead. Crickets hummed, birds chattered, the soundtrack of the Camino. My disappointment began to ease. The Camino was teaching me again. It's not always about what you planned. Sometimes the harder road brings a different kind of reward. Lunch came in botto, a simple bocadillo, crusty bread, ham and cheese. I thought I still had 10 kilometres ahead of me, and I braced myself for another long afternoon. But when I checked my maps more carefully, I realised the distance was shorter than I feared, only 6 kilometres left. The small discovery felt like a blessing. When I reached the albergue, I was the first to arrive. I went through the familiar rituals, boots off, shower, laundry hung out to dry, then rewarded myself with a couple of beers at a nearby bar. Slowly, other pilgrims began to filter in. For the first time since Ourense, I felt the Camino was full again. Among them was Matthew from California and Louis from Salamanca. We shared stories over food, laughed at the oddities of the day, and for a moment the long kilometres no longer mattered. Louis would continue on his bike, but Matthew was on foot. Perhaps he'd become a companion for the final stretch into Santiago. Day 11 was not what I had planned. The short stage I had looked forward to was taken from me, replaced by a long meander through the countryside. Yet in the end, it offered something else. Endurance tested, and the gift of new company. The Camino doesn't follow your script, it writes its own, and sometimes that's where its meaning lies. This was meant to be a gentle day, a shorter stage to rest legs and savour the final stretch, but fate had other plans. What should have been around 22 kilometres stretched into nearly 30. The Camino once again nudged me further than I had expected. I set out with Matthew around 8 AM. The air was cool, the sky soft with morning haze, and our conversation easy. We agreed to share lunch together, aiming for Laza for the day. The road unfolded steadily. Quiet villages, winding lanes, fields and woodland edges. There was no great dramas, only the rhythm of steady walking and the knowledge that Santiago was now within touching distance. We arrived at Laza around 3 PM to find the albergue full. The next stop was a further 7 kilometres, which was a shame as the family-run albergue was welcoming and picturesque. Approaching Ponte, the signs of the modern world began to appear. Power lines, fences, the outlines of industry on the horizon, yet the town itself still held charm. The old bridge arching over the river, the church of Santa Maria Magdalena, watching in silence, and Alberg offering its final welcome before the last day. It was here that I met Patrick, another pilgrim whose path had converged with mine so close to the end. After so many solitary days early in the Camino, these encounters carried even more meaning. We shared stories, simple conversation, and the quiet bond that only pilgrims truly understand. Day 12 was not the most beautiful or the most dramatic, but it carried weight. It was the day I reached the threshold. One last night before the journey's end. The miles stretched, the quiet lingered, and the anticipation settled in. Tomorrow, Santiago. The Camino Sanabrés is a road of solitude. For nearly 2 weeks I walked through silence, endless red dirt tracks stretching to the horizon, fire-scorched hills where the earth itself bore its wounds, and villages so still they felt untouched by time. Day after day I carried nothing but the rhythm of my footsteps, the weight on my shoulders, and the thoughts that rose in the stillness. There were no crowds here, no comfort in numbers, only solitude. But solitude is not emptiness. It is space, space to feel, to reflect, to grieve, to hope. It is where the Camino speaks clearly, not in words, but in whispers carried on the wind. And then, just when the silence feels endless, Santiago rises. The spires appear on the horizon, shimmering in the light, pulling you forward with a force greater than fatigue. Your body aches, your mind races, but your spirit soars. Because this is not just the end of a walk. It is the end of a journey through silence and fire, through doubt and endurance, through every step that tested you and every moment that lifted you. And as you stand before the cathedral, bells echoing across the square, you understand every solitary step was worth it. The Camino Sanabrés is not a path for the many, it's a path for the few. But those who walk it will carry its silence forever. Because in the end, the greatest truth of this Camino is this. In solitude, you discover you are never truly alone. Walk with purpose, trust the journey, and the road will always lead you home.